A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. You ever have that moment at the doctor's office where the phlebotomist lines up like 5 or 6 different vials on the tray, and you start wondering if there's going to be any blood left for the walk back to the car? Then, 2 days later, you log into your patient portal, and there are literally 50 different data points. It feels like a magic trick. You give them 15 milliliters of fluid, and they give you back a spreadsheet of your entire biological existence.
It really is a marvel of industrial engineering. Corn. I think people assume there's a scientist in a white coat standing over a microscope for every single one of those tests. But the reality is more like a high-tech Tesla factory mixed with a high-speed sorting facility. Today's prompt from Daniel is about exactly that, the logistics and the how behind modern blood testing. He wants to know how a few vials allow for hundreds of results and where that journey actually takes place.
Well, I'm glad Daniel asked, because I've always suspected they just have one giant machine that tastes the blood and shouts out numbers. But since you've clearly been reading the technical manuals for Roche and Abbott analyzers again, I assume the truth is slightly more sophisticated. By the way, quick shout out. Today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 1.5 Flash. It's the brain behind the script today.
Herman Poppleberry here, ready to dive into the tubes. And you're right, it is sophisticated. We aren't just talking about chemistry, we're talking about microfluidics, robotic tracks, and some very clever pressurized vacuums. Most people don't realize that the test doesn't start in the lab. It starts the second that needle hits the vein.
Right, because the vials aren't just empty glass jars. They're color-coded like a pack of highlighters. I've noticed the phlebotomist is very specific about the order. They don't just grab whatever is closest. There's a draw order, isn't there?
There is a very strict order of draw. If you cross-contaminate the additives from one tube into another, you ruin the results. Those colored tops, lavender, red, green, light blue, they signify the chemical additives inside. For example, a lavender top has EDTA, which is an anticoagulant that preserves the shape of your blood cells. You need that for a complete blood count, or CBC, because the machine needs to literally count the physical cells. But if you accidentally get that EDTA into a tube meant for testing your calcium levels, the EDTA will bind to the calcium and give you a result that says you have basically no calcium in your body, which would be a medical emergency if it were true.
So the magic starts with pre-treating the sample. But Daniel's core question is about volume. How do they get 50 results out of one lavender tube? Surely they need more than a few drops to check for everything from lead levels to white blood cell differentials.
This is where we get into the beauty of miniaturization and a process called aliquoting. Back in the day, yeah, you needed a lot of blood. But modern high-throughput analyzers, things like the Roche Cobas 8000 or the Abbott Architect, are incredibly efficient. They use microfluidics. We're talking about performing a complex chemical reaction using just a few microliters. A single drop of blood is about 50 microliters. Many modern tests only require 5 to 10 microliters of serum.
Wait, so if a standard vial is 5 milliliters, and we only need 10 microliters for a test, mathematically, one vial could technically provide enough material for 500 tests.
Theoretically, yes. In practice, you need a bit more for the machine to handle the sample and for potential reruns, but the density of information is staggering. Once your blood reaches the lab, the first thing they usually do is put it in a centrifuge. They spin it at thousands of rotations per minute. This is the great separation. The heavy stuff. The red blood cells sinks to the bottom. The clear yellowish liquid, the plasma or serum, stays on top. Most of your chemistry tests, like cholesterol, glucose, and liver enzymes, are done only on that clear liquid.
I've always wondered about that clear liquid. Is it just water, or is it like the syrup of the blood?
It's more like the transport medium. It's packed with electrolytes, hormones, proteins, and waste products. Think of it like a soup where the red blood cells are the vegetables. If you want to taste the broth to see if it's too salty, meaning your sodium is high, you have to strain out the vegetables first. If you don't, the cells might break open and dump their own internal contents into the broth, which ruins the taste or the measurement.
It's like a biological deconstruction. You separate the components, and then the robots take over. I've seen videos of these reference labs, like Quest or LabCorp. They look less like hospitals and more like Amazon fulfillment centers.
That is a perfect description. In a large reference lab, which might process over 100,000 samples a day, they use total laboratory automation. The vials are placed on a conveyor belt track. A robotic arm picks up the vial, a laser reads the barcode to see what the doctor ordered, and then it goes on a journey. If the test requires serum, the track routes it to a centrifuge. Then it goes to an aliquoter. This is a robot that uncaps the tube and uses a precision pipette to suck out tiny amounts of the serum and squirt them into smaller secondary tubes or onto test plates.
So the hundreds of tests aren't all happening in the original vial. The original vial is just the mothership. The robots create a bunch of mini-me samples and send them to different specialized machines. One machine might be doing immunoassays for hormones, while another is doing basic metabolic chemistry.
And the scale of these machines is hard to visualize until you see them. They're often the size of a small SUV. Imagine a massive, sterile cabinet filled with spinning wheels and clicking robotic probes. Some of those machines are monsters. A high-end analyzer can process 1,200 tests per hour. They have these rotating carousels of reagents, the chemicals that react with your blood to produce a measurable signal. The machine drops a tiny bit of your blood and a tiny bit of reagent into a cuvette, measures the color change or the light emission with a spectrophotometer, and boom, your blood sugar level is recorded in the system.
But what happens if the machine runs out of those chemicals? Does a human have to run over with a jug of cholesterol reagent and pour it in?
Not usually. Most of these systems are continuous access. They have secondary carousels that load automatically. If a reagent bottle is getting low, the system alerts the operator, or in some cases, a separate robot arm just swaps the bottle out while the machine is still running. It's designed for zero downtime. If you stop the machine, you're backing up thousands of patients' results.
I love the idea of a robot uncapping the tube. It feels so industrial. But what about the errors? Daniel's prompt mentions that most errors happen before the blood even gets to the robot. If the machines are this precise, where does it go wrong? Is it just the human element?
Statistically, about 70% of lab errors are pre-analytical. That means they happen before the machine ever touches the sample. Maybe the phlebotomist shook the tube too hard and ruptured the red blood cells, that's called hemolysis, and it leaks potassium into the serum, giving a fake high reading. Maybe the courier left the sample in a hot car for 4 hours. Or, most commonly, the patient didn't fast when they were supposed to. If you eat a cheeseburger 2 hours before a lipid panel, the fat in your blood lipemia can actually make the plasma look like a strawberry milkshake, which messes up the optical sensors in the analyzer.
A strawberry milkshake of bad decisions. I've definitely been that patient. But wait, if the plasma looks cloudy like a milkshake, does the machine just give up, or does it try to guess?
It usually triggers an interference flag. The spectrophotometer, the thing that shines light through the sample, realizes the light isn't passing through correctly because of all the fat globules. It will flag the result as lipemic, and a human lab tech has to look at it. They might try to clear the sample using a high-speed microcentrifuge to spin the fat to the top, but often they just have to ask the patient to come back and stop eating bacon before the draw.
That makes sense. But okay, so we have the speed and the automation. But what about multiplexing? Daniel mentioned that. Is that different from just running a bunch of tests in a row?
Multiplexing is the level 2 of blood tech. Instead of taking 10 different aliquots for 10 different tests, you use a technology like Luminex or specialized ELISA panels. These allow you to test for multiple different analytes, say 10 different inflammatory markers, in one single reaction chamber at the same time. They use tiny beads that are color-coded with fluorescent dyes. Each bead is coated with a different antibody. You mix your blood with the beads, and then a laser identifies which bead is which and how much of the target substance stuck to it. It's like doing 10 tests in the space of one.
That sounds like the kind of thing that would have been science fiction 20 years ago. It's basically sorting at the molecular level. I'm curious though, why do we still need so much blood? If we can do a test on 10 microliters, why does the phlebotomist still take 5 full vials? Is it just in case? Volume?
Part of it is dead volume. The machines need a certain amount of liquid in the tube just so the probe can reach it without sucking up air or the buffy coat layer of white cells. But a huge reason is the archive. Most labs keep your samples in a refrigerated robotic archive for 7 to 10 days. If your doctor sees a weird result and says, "Wait, let's add a test for vitamin D," they don't have to call you back in for another poke. They just tell the robot to go find your vial from Tuesday, bring it back to the analyzer, and run the new test.
That is actually incredibly convenient. I always assumed they just toss the blood in a biohazard bin the moment the results hit the screen. The idea of a refrigerated robotic archive of my blood is slightly creepy, but mostly impressive. It's like a library, but instead of books, it's just vials of Herman's cholesterol.
It's a very cold, very organized library, and it's necessary for quality control. Every day these labs have to run controls, basically fake blood with a known value, to make sure the machines are calibrated. If the machine says the control has a glucose of 100, but it's supposed to be 90, they stop everything and recalibrate. The level of oversight is intense. You have medical laboratory scientists. These are highly trained professionals who spend their whole day looking for flags. If a result is physically impossible, like a pH level that would mean the patient is technically a battery, the scientist investigates. They'll look at the sample under a microscope or check for clots before the result is ever sent to your doctor.
I like that the battery check is a standard part of the protocol. I'm imagining a lab tech seeing a result and saying, "Wait, this person isn't a human, they're a Duracell." But let's talk about the where. Daniel asked where these get done. You mentioned hospital labs versus reference labs. What's the split? If I'm at my local GP, where's my blood actually going?
Most likely a reference lab like Quest or LabCorp. These are the mega factories of pathology. They have these centralized hubs where planes and couriers bring in samples from a 5-state radius every night. If you get your blood drawn at 4 p.m., it's probably on a truck by 6, at a sorting hub by 10, and being processed by a robot at 2 a.m. Hospital labs, on the other hand, are for stat tests. If you're in the ER with chest pain, they aren't sending that blood to a different state. They have a smaller version of those same machines right there in the building, so they can get a troponin result in 15 minutes to see if you're having a heart attack.
So it's a hub and spoke model. The routine stuff goes to the massive, hyper-efficient factories, and the "don't let this person die" stuff stays local. That makes sense. It's all about the economy of scale. It's cheaper to run 1,000,000 tests in one giant building than to have 1,000,000 little machines in every doctor's office.
Think about the maintenance costs. If every small clinic had a high-end mass spectrometer, they'd need a full-time engineer on staff just to keep it running. By centralizing, the reference labs can afford the most cutting-edge tech, and the scale is what drives the cost down. That's why a blood test that used to cost hundreds of dollars in the 80s is now relatively cheap. But there's a new player in the where category, and that's at-home testing. You've probably seen these kits where you prick your finger and drop a few spots of blood on a card.
Yeah, and I've always been skeptical of those. How can a few drops on a piece of cardboard be as accurate as a robotic arm in a Quest lab?
Well, you're right to be a bit cautious. Those are often dry blood spot tests. They're great for certain things, like screening newborns for metabolic disorders, but they aren't always as precise as a liquid venous draw. However, there's a middle ground emerging. Companies like Tasso are making these little devices you stick on your arm. They use microneedles and vacuum pressure to collect a small amount of liquid blood, not just a finger prick, and then you mail the whole device to a lab. It's basically trying to bring the phlebotomy chair into your living room.
I'm all for that. If I can avoid the awkward small talk with the person holding the needle, I'm in. But does that change the how? Does the lab have to handle a tiny arm pod differently than a standard vial?
It does. It requires different front-end automation to get the blood out of the device and into a format the big analyzers can read. Often, they have to centrifuge the whole device or use a specialized adapter. But the core chemistry remains the same. Whether the blood comes from your arm, a finger, or a traditional vial, the goal is to get it into a liquid state where those microfluidic pipettes can do their thing. The real frontier here isn't just how we collect the blood, but what we do with the data.
You mean the AI stuff? I assume once you have 50 data points, some algorithm is trying to play connect the dots with your health.
That's the second order effect. We're moving from, is this number in the normal range, to how does this number relate to the other 49 numbers? We've talked about precision medicine before, but this is the infrastructure for it. If an AI looks at 10 years of your blood work, it might see a tiny upward trend in your liver enzymes that is still normal, but is actually a precursor to an issue. The efficiency of the lab is what makes that longitudinal data possible. If blood tests were still 10 milliliters per test and $50 an analyte, we'd only ever do them when we were already sick.
It's the shift from diagnostic to proactive. But it also creates this weird situation where patients have access to all this raw data without the context. My patient portal is just a wall of red and green numbers. It's like looking at the Matrix, but instead of code, it's just my triglycerides.
And that's a real challenge. The lab tech has outpaced the delivery tech. The machines can give you 50 results in 24 hours, but your doctor might not have time to sit down and explain all 50 of them for an hour. That's why understanding the reference range is so important. Most people don't realize that a normal range is just a statistical average of 95% of the healthy population. Being slightly outside the range doesn't always mean you're dying. It might just mean you're in that other 5%.
Or that you had a cheeseburger 2 hours before the test.
Or you ran a marathon the day before and your muscle enzymes are through the roof. Context is everything. But the technical feat of getting that data, the fact that we can route a tube of liquid through a factory at 60 miles an hour, spin it, split it, and test it for 50 things without a human ever touching the fluid, that is a miracle of modern logistics.
It really is. It's funny we spent all this time talking about the robots and the microfluidics, but I keep coming back to the vacuum in the tube. You mentioned the vacutainer earlier, that the blood stops flowing automatically. That's such a simple, elegant piece of engineering. No batteries, no sensors, just a pre-measured amount of nothing in the tube that pulls in exactly the right amount of something.
It's a passive safety system. If you have too much or too little blood for the amount of additive in the tube, the ratio is off and the test is invalid. The vacuum ensures the ratio is perfect every time. It's one of those invisible technologies that makes the whole system work. It was actually invented back in the 1940s by Joseph Kleiner. Before that, phlebotomists had to use manual syringes and then squirt the blood into open test tubes, which was a nightmare for contamination and needle stick injuries.
Wait, so the modern part of blood testing is actually built on a 1940s vacuum trick?
Precisely. We've just gotten much better at what we do with the blood once it's in the tube. The front end is mid-century engineering. The back end is 21st century robotics.
So, for the listeners who are looking at their next lab order, what's the takeaway here? Beyond don't eat a cheeseburger, how should we engage with this massive industrial complex that's processing our vitals?
First, be an advocate for your own pre-analytical quality. If the phlebotomist doesn't check your ID or mislabels a tube, speak up. That's where the errors happen. Second, use those patient portals. Don't just look at the high or low flags. Look at the trends over years. And third, if you're doing direct-to-consumer testing, the kind you order yourself online, make sure the lab is CLIA certified. That's the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendment certification. It's the gold standard that ensures the lab actually follows the rigorous protocols we've been talking about.
CLIA certified? Got it. I'll add that to my list of things to pretend I knew about before this episode. Honestly, it's a bit of a relief to know there isn't just a guy in the back room guessing my iron levels based on the shade of red. It's a relief to know it's a bunch of hyper-precise robots and refrigerated libraries.
It's a high-stakes factory corn, and it's only getting faster. We're reaching a point where nanotainers, even smaller vials, might become the norm as our sensors get even more sensitive. We might get to a point where a single finger stick at the pharmacy gives you a full metabolic workup while you wait for your prescription.
As long as I don't have to look at the needle, I'm happy. But we should probably wrap this up before I start feeling lightheaded just talking about it. This has been a fascinating look into the blood factory. Daniel, thanks for the prompt. It definitely turned my routine labs into something a lot more interesting.
It's a great reminder that there's a whole world of engineering hidden behind the mundane parts of our lives. Next time you see those colored caps, you'll know exactly what's waiting for them at the other end of the conveyor belt.
Ideally, a very clean robot and a very well-calibrated laser. Thanks to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes here. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. They make the robotic archive of our podcast possible.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the tubes, a quick review on your podcast app really helps us reach more curious minds.
Or find us at myweirdprompts.com for the full archive and all the ways to subscribe. Catch you on the next one.
See ya!
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts.